Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade, and today my guest is Rojja. Welcome. Glad you're here.
I am also glad I'm here. Thanks for ensuring that I made it on time.
Time is a construct, so I think we made it regardless. But I'm so excited that we get to sit down together and share share some chaos already. We've done some pre-show music lessons. We first crossed paths, I guess, in a semi-official way in a rotisserie draft.
Yeah, we started as enemies.
Hard to say where we've gone from there, but in the nature of rotisserie draft being that it's all drafted face up with open information, meant that we definitely got to see what each other were doing. And I believe we were right next to each other in the draft.
Yeah, direct neighbors, and every now and then you picked the exact card that I had written down and sent to someone as my next pick if I wasn't there to pick it myself.
Yeah, that was honestly some of my first interaction was I would pick something and tag you in it, and the response back was just all caps, "No! Why would you do this?"
It just seemed cruel and unfair for you to choose the cards that you wanted for your deck. You could clearly see that I had been choosing similar cards, so how could you possibly want them? That doesn't make sense.
Well, it sounded like things ended out the way they were supposed to, though, because when we did end up playing each other, you crushed me with a matching Jund deck that was better than mine.
I believe you. I definitely won a game or two, and I definitely lost a game or two, and as you say, time is fake, so I'm still ready to play the matches that I haven't gotten yet. Zerdan was the only person who was, like, regularly awake at the same time as me.
I think that is one of the funniest things about rotisserie drafts is you're coordinating the time spent to do the draft, and then the draft ends, and everybody's suddenly like, "All right, well now I'm super busy and I can't play."
Yeah, kudos or sympathies to anyone who has, like, finished out all of their games in a roto draft. That seems very tricky unless you, like, meet up in person.
So, Roja, how did you find your way into cubing?
For some reason, my partner wanted to play Magic even though we were intensely anti-capitalist and more of, board gamers than collectible card gamers. We had, like, told our friends, "Oh, no, we're not coming out to play Magic. That's a collector's hobby. But if you want to play Sekigahara or Terra Mystica or Carcassonne, like, we're so down." And she taught me how to play, and I discovered that mull drifters are very cool. And she showed me that 1 and 2 drops with not much going on other than their stats or maybe a tap ability to add a counter to them are actually even better than mull drifters, and that was not my favorite thing to learn.
Well, see, now you're speaking my language though, with all the small creatures that you get to build up, and I think we're going to see some of that sensibility in some of the cubes that you worked on too.
Yeah, Cashbox has really been very red heavy, and I find that a lot of the cards that look the coolest in previews are red, and most of my customs that I make are red, and that's very strange to me because I'm a dirtler at heart. But I don't know. I'm actually with Joe on this that it's very exciting to try to get something done with a 3/1.
This is Joe Anderson, famed aggro. How would you call him? Aggro specialist, initiative aficionado.
Yeah, he's Minsk, he's Boo, he's heroic reinforcements on or off a stick. Yeah.
Amazing. Um,
I mean, some folks call him a stellar pup, but I think those folks haven't met him yet.
you said red cards are some of the most appealing right off the bat. Do you think that's just because of accessibility of mechanics, or do you think there's something else to that?
Mm,
Like fire and explosions are fun, maybe.
yeah, if a red card has interesting mechanics on it, I guess you tend to be like trying to get away with something. Like a blue card will just draw 2, and a red card will typically impulsive draw 2. So you kind of have to get away with risking those cards in that way and maybe not having enough mana to cast it all. Slipping by under the radar is, I think, more thrilling to read than, oh yeah, draw 3 cards, counter any spell, sit around with a 6/6 or a 4/4 flyer for 4. That's just an okay stat line these days. I don't know. I'm not trying to say blue is bad, but red is exciting.
No, that's fair. Totally fair. So when you're building cubes, and we're gonna focus in on one of them here in just a second, do you tend to like to start with a particular card or color? It sounds like red has been kind of the focus of a couple of them, either intentionally or inadvertently.
I don't start with a card, although I do want to try doing that one of these days, the seed crystal method that the Lucky Puppers devised. But I think I start with a archetype or a handful of cards that like had to be cut in another cube or never quite made the grade to be included in another cube. So out of some kind of spite or like I'll show everyone, which is maybe not quite the same thing as spite. I I take my fairy guide mother in the first iteration of this cube, or more recently, just the idea of like goblins and like the crummy goblins, not the ones that have commas in their name and are full of lunchables. Yeah, and these goblins, they're actually going to be good enough to cube. And I try to invert expectations as to like what's a pickable card.
I think that's actually a good segue into it. So the cube that when we were talking about connecting here that I was pointed toward is labeled a rusty box o' goblins, which I think I'm just saying too square, but
Yeah, it's a rusty cash box filled with goblins.
and the sounds you're
Listeners can
hearing are the
hear.
box being opened, by the way.
Yeah, it is actually a rusty cash box. Presumably, dollars were temporarily stored in here before being handed off to a manager, and now it has goblins, and it's so it's got something to prove itself.
I say, and goblins have no manager.
That's right. You can attempt to manage goblins, but you're just their annoyer, not their manager.
So which came first, the box or the cube here?
The cube, I think it was just a goblin's cube, but the BCW card box that I had been keeping it in was needed for storing other cards that kept coming in because it turns out if you're willing to play so-called bad cards, you can get a lot of them for a few bucks. So this guy in Hawaii just kept mailing me plain white envelopes that were swollen with, 3 stacks of cards just barely contained within. Anyway, they had to go in a box, and the goblins came out, and I thought this cash box would be a funny aesthetic.
It frankly seems perfect. I know podcasting not quite a visual medium, but the listeners are missing out on just the great aesthetic. As you noted, actually rested has a wealth of stickers of various levels of rebellion on it. Really a thing of art itself.
Thank you. I'm glad it brings the noise and represents goblins appropriately. It has like stickers from medications on it. Was the latest thing I added. Um, I thought it'd be funny if, as someone reached for the latch, they suddenly noticed small instructions next to their hand, and it says "Take with food." And
I mean, that sounds very appropriate here.
yeah, thanks, thanks.
I don't know if you do overviews necessarily, but can you give us an elevator pitch for the Rusty Box of Goblins? Or is it something you just throw at people and say, all right, it's drafting time?
No, I guess I do try to pitch it, but I tend to pitch it to inexperienced players. So since most of our audience is very enfranchised, I think I would pitch it as something like those cards that you have in an ultra bulk bin that you maybe never expected to play with ever again. They've all come out to hunt you now, and you'll have to cobble together a functional deck out of what most people would call unplayables, which is a challenge, but the other folks will be struggling under the same conditions. And it's kind of fun just to find out like who manages to cross the finish line, faceplant in the dirt, and never be heard from again.
This is like QWOP, whoever can actually move forward.
Yes, this is a lot like QWOP, actually. Good shout.
You mentioned a couple things on your cube cover page that I really liked. One of them, you're talking about trying to keep power and toughness particularly low. Is that something that's just by merit of them being cheaper cards, or is that something that was like a design decision?
That is an accidental design decision. In some of its first iterations, when it finally had Chitter Spitter and Field of the Dead removed, um,
Whoa.
yeah, those would be unhinged inclusions nowadays. Shortly after those two things got removed, and we were playing with some folks for the first time, I heard all these comments that got me more excited about the project than I had been before. Because at first it just felt like a silly experiment, but then when I heard people say things like, "Oh, this feels desperate. Like I don't know what I'm going to do about that flying tutu that keeps hitting me." And I heard like, "Oh, if I put this equipment on this creature and this other creature donates an exalted trigger, I have built Ragafan out of 3 cards." And um, I loved the idea of needing to like build your own tools instead of them coming prepackaged in what we now call Lunchables. I love that thought technology so much.
Shout out to Joe and Henry Clay. Well, that has to be really satisfying though when like you unintentionally create tension in the environment that players are working to solve. That it's not like a frustration, that it's a without sounding corny, that it's like an opportunity then to do something cool with it.
Yeah, and those impressions that people got of the environment then got to be the direction that I drove towards, like pulling away things that made people feel too safe, and including a lot more cards that just give you like half of an idea. Elvish Berserker, I think, is one. It only has good power and toughness if somebody blocks it. And Elvish Bard, in the same way, it forces other creatures to block it, but that doesn't do you a ton of good unless you give it Death Touch or a lot more power.
But it gives you little puzzles to solve. It's not all spelled out right there on the card.
Right. And all these pieces kind of shaken up in a big metal box, and then it's not like, oh, there's blue red spells and green white cats. I mean, there definitely are a lot of cats in green and white, but if you just think you're drafting a cats deck, you're not going to do well. You have to like find other solutions to the problems you'll be encountering. The cat deck, one, doesn't exist, and two, doesn't include everything you need. The elf ball, I'm pretty proud of. You can tutor an elf pretty easily, but all of the elves don't do a lot on their own.
So you get the elves, and then you have a moment of now what?
Yeah, are you going to put crystal carapace on them, or are you going to just start sacrificing them? But you're probably not going to be swinging in with an 8/8 elf who's that big only because there are other elves on the board, you know?
You also noted that you had some restrictions with your removal. Like you've tried to keep it. I think you said sorcery speed and or combat based. I guess it would be or so sorcery speed or having to do with combat.
Yeah, this is maybe an example of that spite I was alluding to a while back. I've heard so many times auras are generally a bad idea. Don't get cards for your deck that need other cards, just take creatures and removal, and that's all you need. And if players don't use those heuristics and they actually try to do something complicated with their cards, they tend not to get punished in this environment. So that's one of a bunch of ways I try to level the playing field between less experienced drafters and more experienced drafters. Like that's one thing that the less experienced players will tend to do is enchant their creatures, and so I try as much as possible to not punish it.
I like that approach. I mean, that gives you an outlet to do that where you're not just getting blown out by somebody who knows that, hey, instant speed removal pretty good. Did you draw any inspiration from a set like Portal that was trying to simplify just the mechanics of the game?
No, I didn't directly draw inspiration from Portal, but it may have wound up influencing things accidentally because the Foglios have such good artwork on their cards that those were some of the earliest inclusions. Just great Foglio art, like that paste-eating orc.
Yes. Goblin Librarian or Orcish Librarian?
Orcus Librarian, you got it in two.
Close. You generally seem drawn to these low power or lower value environments. Have you explored other higher power things, or is that just generally not interesting to you?
I would say the higher power stuff feels more well explored by streamers, especially, and people who've played What the Wolf's Cube, or I know it's White Wolf, or the MTGO Vintage Cube. Like they have so many heuristics memorized for those cards that I feel anxious or intimidated about including them. Like Grim Lavamancer is a go-to example for me of a card where in the hands of me and certainly some of the newer players that are drafting with us, Grim Lavamancer might remove one creature and then die. And in the hands of some of the more experienced folks, Grim Lavamancer just keeps on doing stuff. And if I don't use the cards that everyone is so familiar with, then again, I'm trying to level the playing field some, or at least that's what I think I'm doing.
I think that's a really interesting way to think about it, though, that playing in this kind of space is more unexplored. There's a freshness to it, perhaps just based on unfamiliarity for some people.
Right, yeah. Even if you see commons from Brothers War, you're not playing in Brothers War. So, yeah, you'll have to figure out what this does when you attach it to Elvish Bard, who is definitely not in Brothers War.
Yeah, Elvish Bard hasn't been in the lot since the early days.
Yeah, I ended up cutting the mana cost on that by one. Ultimately, it was just a trap. Even when people who do sometimes 3-0 really did their best to make the most of it. It's now a 4 mana card.
Okay, so we're doing these are edits on the card itself.
Yes, I try to make it incredibly hard to miss that a few of the cards have been changed. There'll be a gold Sharpie asterisk up at the top. There'll be a little slip of paper at the bottom that says errata. And then, of course, whatever's been changed is also crossed out with gold Sharpie and rewritten.
So how do you pick which cards to alter in the environment? Is it usually to bring things up to power level? Is that to bring things down? It sounds like most don't need help going down.
The in general is harder to answer, but I can think of a few specifics.
Sure.
Threw in Twiddle because it has really lovely Rebecca Gay art, and as a Rube Goldberg enjoyer, as a Durdler, I looked at Season of Growth and other things that want to be tapped or untapped and might be hard to do that in combat, or they just want to be targeted. And I said, "Oh, why is no one picking Twiddle? It's got so many things it interacts with in this environment." And for most people, that still wasn't enough to bring it up to playable. So I thought, well, I'll try slapping Rebound on it. because that's one of my favorite mechanics, and
Yeah, there you go.
that doubles your season of growth triggers and gives a creature potentially pseudo vigilance for a couple turns, and that ended up being enough to make it go. In other cases, I often find that very experienced players only pick the cards that are 3 mana or less, or they have 4 power or more, and I will see the same 4 or 5. I mostly don't have 6 mana cards, but I'll see the same 4 and 5 mana cards showing up in 0-3 draft pools, and I can see that people are choosing Diabolic Tutor because it has a cute queer baiting art on it, or they'll put in Elvish Bard because they can see all the payoffs for it, but they're not winning that way. So the cards that people aspirationally lose with, I knock a point or two of mana cost off them and see if that makes them playable. And it usually does.
That's a really cool solution. So, do you find that your players respond well to eroded cards? Is that something that they have to get used to on the front end?
I think they have not had trouble with them, possibly because it's a card that they've already seen go round a couple times. Land of Mordor, aka the third lucky pupper Parker, he's generally very big on like keeping cubes simple and not adding any quote unquote weird stuff. Um, so I know it's like against his philosophy, but it's never seems to bug him because it's a card he already knows. Most of the cards in this cube are old, and the ones that I errata are cards that he has seen and passed several times because he's one of those people that generally knows what he's doing. So you liked Rebound. Did you like Zendikar?
So I wasn't playing during Zendikar. I think I just really enjoyed the mechanic. I've played around in the custom design space, and I found that Rebound was interesting because you could do something at instant speed that then was recontextualized immediately on the next upkeep because it was at a different time. Like if you cast something during combat, how it functioned during upkeep was going to definitionally be different.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that's one of the things I've enjoyed about Rebound Twiddle.
Right, because like you can tap down a blocker, you can if you have something funky to do in your upkeep, I guess you can reset a land. Like there's a lot of interesting things to do there.
I guess I was asking about Zendikar because I am trying to figure out whether people are more jazzed about Dominaria, Zendikar, or Alara. Your car chat with Bones has me thinking about like the original IP worlds and which one is the most evocative and which one people love the most because I'm definitely gonna center a cube project around that after hearing how much fun y'all had revisiting Alara.
Yeah, it is funny to think because some of those are well over a decade old, and I think all of them that you've referenced were done the first time prior to me starting playing. So my nostalgia is not the same. It's like
Mhm.
I know of these sets, or like my first visit to Zendikar was Battle 4, which has been perhaps broadly panned by the community in some ways. Do you have any particular leanings at this point?
I always thought of Dominaria as the plane that magic is set on, but hearing y'all wax so enthusiastically about Alara had me kind of thinking again about how excitingly alien those very barren Esper landscapes are, and the extremely like you're always in danger stuff in Jund, and just the like creepy Grixis stuff has me thinking these OG planes for you and I, they came about before we started, so we didn't have time to like figure out what the heck a Zendikar is, but we'd see these vampires who were either night hawking it around or visiting Zulaport or doing whatever it is Zendikari vampires do.
They all look like acrobatic contortionists, like hopping around the rocks on the plane.
Oh yeah, yeah, Dutch angles, lots of motion blur lines. Like they do not sit still. Uh, because we had to like get our heads in the game and get to playing, we just Zulaport was part of the background, so it feels like Zulaport is just something that everyone should know and take for granted because it was never new to us. So that's why y'all's chat inspired me to start thinking of a cube that evokes those old school original settings that I don't know, just feel like magic in a way like they're trying to tap into with foundations.
Well, it sounds like Rusty Box of Goblins also captures a measure of that, right? You're making decisions based on artwork and feeling and effects that aren't tied to like some high and lofty mechanical aspiration.
Yeah, a lot of stuff in, at least initially, just because it's Rebecca Gay or because it'll trigger a season of growth, so it can't be that bad. Um,
You said like there was this drive to try to build something that feels like magic. Does what you've created in the Goblins, does that feel like magic to you?
Definitely, and like aggressively kitchen table. Parker has been really helpful for having the kind of organized brain that notices trends and helps me make more of my decisions intentional instead of just like, oh, I kind of feel like prowess, so I'll throw in Monastery Mentor, and I'm sure that'll be fine. Whereas Parker kind of analyzes things from a brainier standpoint and has told me things like, you've got one future sight frame, a lot of original modern frames, some old border. There's kind of a pastiche going on here that ties together all the eras and just throws them at you like a sampler platter or a or a flight of beer shots. And yeah, I've leaned into that to bring janky kitchen table magic with all sorts of random cards that someone gave you or you bought on a whim. They're all just in here together and they give you a taste of all of the standard environments that have existed mostly up to a certain point.
With card frames, you'd mentioned when we were talking some before recording that there's been kind of a renaissance of people wanting to pursue old border cubes and pursue simplicity in their own designs and looking to old border cards as a way to find that, but that in your opinion that's not entirely the best way to do that.
No, I think that's very fun and there's a lot of hidden gems that like never found themselves into the cube tutor average 360. In the regular cube, Anthony's trying to make stuff happen with Puppet Conjurer, and nobody else is doing that. So even though the card has existed for a long time, there is lots of fresh stuff to find in those old cards. But yeah, I have been thinking, okay, people are really enjoying these gonzo old sets where the design team didn't have a very good grasp of balance, or they only viewed that balance through the lens of constructed standard decks. And so the impacts that those cards have on cube is incredibly variable. And you know who else doesn't necessarily have a perfect grasp of balance, but just an endless fountain of creativity and novelty is people who are making custom sets or at least custom cards. Digging into old border and recontextualizing stuff from there is tons of fun and obviously something I'm doing with the Goblins, but the official WotC products aren't the only place to find novelty and inspiration and quality. Like so many people have made so much cool stuff, and some of it has been reviewed by others or worked on by a team. So I'm hoping that's the next big renaissance is people going, oh, you know what, the stuff that people have been making out in the backwoods hill country, these kind of moonshine flavored cards, like these are sick too. I think Morgan talked about that a little when you interviewed her. She has a couple customs in her disaster movie cube, and they've filled a niche perfectly, and her drafters have had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she was a big proponent of that as a way to kind of feel out needs in your cube, feel out and feel out. You like to determine what it needs.
Yeah, I want to play Bones' Alara set and see which one wins. Bones, just one little person, but with a lot of available hindsight and perspective, or this huge design team who didn't super well know what they were doing at the time, but they did have a lot of resources. Like who wins? Who made the coolest set? There can only be one.
Well, time is such a valuable resource there too. I mean, when you're designing a custom project or a cube, you don't have any sort of time restriction except what you impose on yourself, which is going to change the kind of effort and the kind of energy you're able to put into it. Do you find that your process looks more like gathering cards in a pile and seeing what happens, or do you like to explore spreadsheets or putting lists together?
Oh yeah, the my cube Cobra page is always incorrect, and there's no spreadsheet, but there are piles of cards here and there. And when I can remember what one of them is for, then I bring it to people like my buddy Juan, who is part of the organizers at Vertex, is a fan of Rusty Cashbox. So sometimes I just make him sit down and I show him, okay, this card, good feelings or bad feelings. This card, and
Just a little vibe check.
yeah. And eventually, when I have a bunch of things I want to cut, then I throw in a bunch of things that I've been waiting to try, but it's all piles. There's, I don't want to give the wrong idea. It's not just like art and flavor text and name of card vibes, but also like the mechanical vibe of most creatures will die if they headbutt a savannah lion in this cube. So that desperate and scrappy feeling. And then just letting friends kind of dictate the finer detail. Like I make a big pile of stuff that I'm potentially excited about, and then Parker is very valuable for cuts, and Juan is very valuable for ads because Juan's excited about trying things in the cube, and Parker wants to keep it simple. So I just use them to help me winnow out my piles into a manageable size.
It's like your personal id, ego, super ego team to help you.
Yeah, anything you can try to figure out yourself is even better if you have a whole nother person to do half your thinking.
Do you get to play this cube with some regularity?
Yeah, it got a lot of repetitions when our cube group ballooned in size and not all of the new people had cubes yet. Now it's kind of been taking a back seat as I've been wanting to see everyone's first run creations. They're always like really jazzed about something, and I wanna see that spark, that inspiration, and sometimes it'll inspire a huge shift in my own cube. I think it's been tabled at least 20 times, maybe 30, including at Steel City, which was super helpful. The power band would be a lot wider if it hadn't gone through a bunch of revision and a bunch of playtesting.
The reason I ask it that way is that it sounds like you have a lot of people who are giving you active feedback, and then you have opportunity to actually, like you said, put it on the table and see what sticks. And I know that's something that not everybody has, so that it seems like a cool pipeline to get a lot of these things worked through.
Yeah, it is so nice. We just did the thing that Anthony suggested of having Cube Night every Thursday over and over and over again. A lot of times it was only four people. A few times it was even only two or three, but we kept doing it, and it was worth it because now everyone gets to play a bunch of cube. Usually there's two cubes, so the kind of high power grognards can get something a little more vintagey, and then there's something really off the wall usually.
Are there design principles or practices that you've used on the cash box that you apply to your other projects?
I don't know about design principles, but wacky experiments have gone so well and been so fun. And even when something doesn't pan out, we we ran a custom card, Goblin Squablin, that someone designed in the MTG Cube Talk Discord, from which you and I know each other, because it said goblin on the card, and it's a good rhyme. And a very skilled player, Safra, looked at the numbers and went, "Yeah, this seems pretty fair. When you put X mana into it, you get a fair result." And I thought, "Oh well, if Safra likes it, it's definitely a great idea. Let's just run this thing." And I forgot that Safra is coming from a vantage point of playing a lot of Legacy Constructed and having cubes that try to emulate Legacy Constructed. So Goblin Squablin just ran over people's faces. It was very fun for the person who drafted it, and the people who lost to it kind of didn't mind because it was so clearly out of their control when the Goblin Squablin happened to them that all they could do was just shrug and laugh and go, "Well, let's play another game and hopefully you don't draw that card." We immediately cut it, and I want to bring it back someday at a lower power level, but it was totally worth just running the darn thing. And so, long story short, working with the cash box has me much more excited to just throw lots of spaghetti at lots of walls, and something good will come of it. We'll just try the most gonzo ideas in the next couple cubes, and people will have fun even if it's technically not good gameplay. Like, they'll laugh about bad gameplay or they'll enjoy good gameplay. Either way, everyone has fun, right?
Yeah, that's the hope for sure. And I like that goal that many people have said it. I'm trying to remember who most recently, that you want people to have fun losing as well. Like, how do you make everything fun, or as much fun as possible? If you're going to get ranched by a custom card, it may as well be something funny. Did you did you want to talk any about spite?
Maybe spite is a bit narrow of an idea, but contrarianism is such a powerful fuel. If you're kind of feeling like the underdog because you've played less Magic than most of the people you're playing with, or you're extremely visibly queer, or you have always been someone who dresses like a punk or whatever, it can be kind of exhausting to think you've got to catch up and learn and do all the things that other people are doing, but at an accelerated pace. And it's such a source of feeling more relaxed and more motivated to come at things from an angle of contrarianism, like, no, I'm going to do it this other way, and that will also work and is also fine. And this binary is false, and these bad cards are awesome. And just approaching everything from an angle where you'll like find your own platform and shout invectives from it, in Goblin, of course.
Does it feel like with that kind of approach, does it feel like you're designing against anything, or any particular idea, or is it more of a, like you said, kind of a motivation to excel intrinsically?
I'd say mostly it is a motivational fuel, and as far as things to design against, I guess it's just, expectations, like including Spellstutter Sprite and not other fairies, or just Pestermite because it's cool and you might find a way to do something with it.
Pestermite is just twiddle with wings.
Yeah, so despite like or contrarianism can be a way to figure out a thing you want to try in cube, Pestermite, but not the one that everyone knows.
Do you think that that makes it harder to market sounds like the wrong word, but do you think it becomes harder to get other people along with these ideas if they are not familiar in that way?
Oh yeah, sometimes like when I was having a little difficulty summarizing my cube to someone, a guy said, "Well, you see, it's got bad cards on purpose." and and that was too much of a simplification and kind of missing the point, but it does help with finding the people who want to try something novel. Even for a bad elevator pitch like that, they'll go, "A cube with bad cards on purpose? I am intrigued."
It's kind of like everything's worth trying once sort of mentality for cube, right?
Yes. And if you're clearly being contrarianist and people want to sit down and do the thing with Goblin Rabble Master that they're accustomed to, this isn't that Goblin Cube. And so we can save each other some time and quote unquote swipe left. Is that the way where you vote against someone?
I I don't I don't know.
I can't remember whether swipe left is the no thanks or swipe right is the no thanks, but anyway, swipe in the direction of saving you both time, you know?
Do you think that having a cube like the cash box or you like designing in this way to do something contrarian, does that become like a safe outlet to be rebellious in a way?
I don't think that comes into it. It's more like a jam band than tagging in an approved location for tagging, you know?
That's a cool way to say it though. You're inviting people to play in the space and the rules are less defined.
Yeah. What was that particularly revolutionary one? Did they call it free jazz? Busting convention and having fun while doing it rather than just swimming upstream.
There was this whole movement throughout music, especially in the early part of the century and as you moved into like the 30s and 40s, where composers were really working to take control of their own music of like, we don't want to follow these conventions so that these can be used for other purposes. We're intentionally going against the grain of what's expected so that it can't be used for corporate or nationalistic purposes. That there's this desire to just do something wild because then it was expressive and individual.
Yeah, get you a music movement where it can't be used in an advertisement. It just won't fit, or get you a haircut where you can't get hired at anywhere you wouldn't want to work.
There you go. Build a cube that wouldn't get you hired. No, wait, hold on. It doesn't carry.
Build a cube that would make Gavin Verhey blush, or whoever.
No, that's so good. Roja, we've covered a lot of ground here. To try to draw a small part of it into a little circle,
Mhm.
what advice would you consider offering to other people who are working on their own cube projects?
You can spend a lot of time seeking feedback on your theoretical archetypes, and a lot of helpful people will try to say what they can in this manner, but like you can take 10 pounds of that and half a pound of actual play testing with the people you enjoy spending time with, and that half a pound of a little bit of play testing, or I don't even like the term playtesting because you're just playing games. You're having fun whether it's a well-tested cube or not. That will give you so much direct, actionable feedback that I would say maybe you don't necessarily need to seek advice until after you've played at least one game with it because that's so much more valuable or something like that. I don't know. I was trying to go a different direction than all the people who are like, just play the cards you like, don't overthink it. I was trying to take a little different tack.
Well, let me pivot a little bit. What's been some of the best advice you've received as a designer?
Reduce the mana curve. Don't have higher toughness than power most of the time. And like in a vacuum, I didn't hear those very well, but playtesting experience bore it out because players who fill their deck with too many high mana value spells end up not really ever getting their deck off the ground and having a less fun time. Yeah, just the usual advice, I guess, is usually good, but it took live games for me to really believe it.
I think there's something valuable about, "Hey, everyone's right." Like, everyone was right about the
Yeah,
stuff we're supposed to do.
yeah, a lot of the basic advice was good, and instead of going, "Yeah, but this 5 mana thing seems so cool," and people shrugged and said, "Yeah, it is so cool, but, it's not gonna go so great," and it turned out that the advice to drop the curve was actually a good idea.
Well, Roja, as we move toward wrapping up, I get to ask one of my favorite questions.
Why is this one of your favorite questions?
Well, that is a
Interrupted
good
cow.
no, that's a great question. I think it tells me a lot about people. It gives people a chance to be expressive and individual about something. You know, we were kind of just talking about that with what advice do you give, and there are a lot of things that are kind of broad brushstrokes that everybody can lean on. But if I say, "Hey, what's something that you care about and how or why do you care about it?" Well, then that's unique to you. You're not going to pick the same card as the next guest or the previous guest. You know, you may pick a similar artist for similar
Yeah,
reasons, maybe. You may even pick the same card, but the reasons why are uniquely you, and I think that's why I get so excited about it.
cool, cool. Yeah, I this question had always confused me a little bit because it kind of seemed like a curveball from cube design, but now that makes more sense if it's, figuring out some individual aspect of each guest. I guess I have two main.
Perhaps I should ask the question first,
Oh yeah.
just in case. If you could have any card as a promo, what card would it be, and who would you have do the illustration?
Okay. I definitely know the second part. Susan Van Camp has this charming style that reminds me of just drawing something cool in high school. And whether you're doing it for a class project or you're trying to win a little art contest for high schoolers, there's an earnestness to that, like straightforward, not terribly overworked. Like, this is a depiction of a wolf and another wolf. This is a depiction of a gal and her jackal pup, and the jackal pup is sick. Um, and that dang amazing elvish bard is just serving up their own whole ersatz gender with that dance they're doing in those pantaloons.
Like full on 80s glamour shot style.
Yeah, and and then there's these like profiles of people's faces. Yeah, Susan Van Camp needs to come back. Susan Van Camp is the revolution. I just enjoy those really earnest depictions on cards a lot, and I don't know what it should be. I mean, redoing loot would be great because loot looks terrible. Um,
You were talking about the new, loot, the key to everything or
yeah,
the
yeah,
exuberant explorer.
yeah. The plushy baby Yoda. Many words have been spent on this already on the internet. Um, but if we got Susan Van Camp to come back and do some of these legendary goblins, it could be any of them. It doesn't matter. Just whichever one. Like the original Veal Smasher art isn't super inspiring. Susan Van Camp could do that, or just redo Ardaz or Gut, which already look pretty cool, but I'd love to see it in her quirky style. Yeah, I don't know. The specific card isn't very important. We just need her back.
I was scrolling through some of her work here, and I'm seeing something like Orcish Spy, which feels like it already starts to capture the direction you're thinking.
Is that the one that just shows everyone what the top card of your library is?
This is it's red for a 1/1 that lets you look at the top 3 cards of target player's library and put them back. There's no reordering. You just get to look.
Just take a look. That's amazing. Yeah, that card is exactly the right card for Van Camp to be working on, or to have done already, I guess. But some new goblins in her style would be fantastic. Or just, get all the people in Cube Talk to do tokens.
So it just sounds like you need a wealth of goblin tokens for the box.
Yes, make me goblin tokens. I decree it.
Well, Roja, this has been a treat and so fun to talk through so many things. If people want to follow up a little bit on, as you said, perhaps an inaccurate version of the Rusty Box of Goblins, where should we point them?
Whenever I do a major update to the cube, I just change the short URL to be the new cube. So this cube will always be at Spice Goblins. And then from there, you can find my other cubes, which are mostly fallow at the moment. But leave a comment on an update, and I'll leave a comment on one of your updates because asynchronous communication is sick and chill.
The future is now, old man.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for giving of your time and your passion and your goblins. This is this has really been a blast for me, and I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to do it.
Thanks for having me on. Good luck with your next interview.
Thank you.